Great to be back here with you all, and looking forward to talking about the topic today. I say that at the beginning of every webinar. I'm very lucky. I love my job. I love the work we're doing, and today we're going to focus on this idea of personalized employee engagement. Let me start out by just taking a minute to give a little background on me, because I really think it helps to have a sense for where I'm coming from as I present the model today that we're going to talk through. I got a start in my career as a clinician. Clinical psychology was my major area of study in both my graduate and postgraduate work, as well as social psychology. But pretty soon after finishing up a lot of that work, I shifted into other areas. During the time I was in my training, I also was doing a lot of behavioral science, basic science work, and having the opportunity to work with some of the most amazing and as we'll see as we go along here, the most prolific and impactful behavioral scientists on the planet today, specifically focusing on the things that I'm sure are the major areas of concern for people on this call, dealing with motivation, engagement, well-being, which is a huge focus of ours, and have been working alongside them and partnering in the development of motivation works in our company for over 3 decades now. And so there's going to be a strong sense of science in what we talk about today. And both of these things really are fueling an approach that we'll take, which is our mission in all the work that we do is to benefit human well-being and happiness. And you're going to see that thread strongly as we go through. And finally, I do want to mention that I've also spent the last 25 years as a CEO. Sometimes when you kind of provide a background as as a behavioral scientist or a clinician, there's some skepticism that that's great. We love science. We love to apply it, but we have real world things to figure out. We have balance sheets, and we have growth targets, and we have KPIs, and we have a lot of things we have to do. I know all those things well. I've founded and run companies for, as I said, for quite a while now. And so I'm always concerned with making sure that whatever we're doing with our science, that we're applying it in ways that are practical and in ways that can be greatly beneficial to the people in the organization and to the organization itself. I want to start by pointing out a continuing and growing problem, and that problem has to do with engagement and specifically also well-being. These things are inexorably tied together. Well-being is going to be the thing that drives engagement. I've done a number of webinars on this. Here I'm actually putting up some well-being data, and this again is from Gallup, which is kind of the bellwether for both engagement and well-being. And you can see here that, at the start of the pandemic, we saw, this climbing in people's sense of well-being in their organizations, actually to historic highs. And when we were watching all this happening, I actually gave a HCI webinar right around the time that these numbers started to come out, and there was this surge in well-being and engagement. And the large focus of that talk was, let's not miss an important issue here. Let's not miss what's going on. Because what was happening at the time were companies, because we were all in such a state of pandemic shock, that we all huddled together, and you saw authentic care for well-being really emerge at the employee level, care for employees. And this unlocked this great surge, and we actually saw what we've been talking about for years happen, which is when you take care of employees and you're really authentically focused on their well-being, suddenly this protracted problem of bad employee engagement, right? Employee engagement numbers have always stayed in the 30s, but but it's because we've never really broken out of our traditional models about how we approach it, and we kind of got shocked out of those models, and I really didn't want people to lose that lesson, but of course we started to fall back into those patterns. Our megaphone wasn't quite big enough, and you could see that we're now at the place where the percent of employees that believe that organizations really care about their well-being is now sinking to almost historic lows. And engagement, I don't have the engagement chart up here, but engagement is down for the first time in a decade after making modest gains, but never getting out of the 30s, right? This is a protracted problem. And so what I want to move to today is I've mentioned already that, there's some real value here in focusing on the individual employee. And when we look at our organizations, organizations have this structure, right? We're trying to engage people. We're trying to do great things in our organizations. And the employees are the ones that form the strong foundation. They are the multitudinous people in our organization. Engagement is a person by person phenomena. Well-being is something that happens at an individual level. And so you have all of these employees, and we need to somehow be able to reach them. And then, of course, we have our managers and frontline managers, which we task with doing all kinds of things, including, as we're going to see, we task them with somehow, pulling forth engagement from their teams, which we're going to find out shortly is entirely the wrong model to be engaged in. It's why our employee engagement efforts are not bearing the fruit that they should. And then, of course, on the top, we have our leaders who are managing strategy. And I'm sure there are a lot of leaders on this call, and I bet most people on this webinar are in the leader or manager role. And so we have this shape to our organizations, right? We have the strongest foundation is all our people and all our employees. Now, if we look at the structure of our employee engagement programs, we're going to immediately see a problem because our structure doesn't match this structure. Our structure is completely the opposite. It's inverted. When we look at the outputs that come from our employee engagement, who gets the dashboards? Who gets the data? Who gets the training? Where does it happen? Well, of course, leaders get the most. So leaders are getting dashboards and reports, and there's meetings, all kinds of things happening. And then managers, a lot of programs will give managers resources and some reporting and, certainly marching orders for things that they should be doing with their teams in order to, again, somehow coax engagement forth. But employees, what do employees do? Well, they do most of the work and engagement efforts. They fill out all the surveys and questions, everything. They go off, those questions go off into the void, and then they get the very least. Something trickles down at the end. Maybe it's a town hall where some results are talked about and some initiatives are mentioned. Maybe it's a couple of meetings with their manager to talk over results, but they're not getting anything near the resources that we're giving to managers and leaders. And this is amazing to me because engagement, as we know from all the work we're going to go over today, is something that has to happen at the individual level. And so this is why the inverted shape here that mismatches our organization is actually why things are so broken. And so we need to get past these fundamental flaws that we have in giving all the information to the top and then expecting a command and control approach to engagement going forward. Now, it makes sense that it's like this. It makes sense because we're used to being the leaders and managers. And the last webinar I did, I talked about the fact that management itself has really got to get past some of its fundamental assumptions. The word manage has in its definition control. So we're used to being in control of things, and we feel like we must take control of engagement, and we must kind of, pull it forth somehow, cajole it, do something to get engagement out of our people. The problem is that our employees have this pesky habit of being human beings, just like we are. And human beings are actually not motivated, nor do they react well to control. And a lot of the things I'm going to talk about today, I would encourage you to reflect on putting yourself in the role of the employee, putting yourself in the role from being the controller to being the one controlled. And just think about what's your natural reaction to it. And you'll, from the gut, understand what I'm talking about. But this is one of the challenges. This is why this pivot to personalized employee engagement has such potential, right? Because the engagement itself is not in your direct control. So many of the things we want in our efforts to build our cultures and for our employees, well-being and trust and engagement, these are not things we can put our hands on like a knob and turn it and increase it. These are things that need to come from within each employee. But the good news is that every employee already has that engine They already intrinsically want to be engaged. And I'm going to convince you of this as we go along, for those of you who are skeptical. But every employee, even the employees that you're thinking about now in your organization or on your teams, is like, boy, that person is definitely, I do not believe that they want to be engaged. If I didn't do something, believe me, all they would do is ba, 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 ba. I'm going to argue today and show you that it's intrinsic to everyone, even those people, that they want to be engaged. And if we know how to approach it, we finally have the opportunity to get everyone engaged and do it through an avenue where everyone's excited and has a greater sense of well-being, vitality, etc. And what I'm calling this is personalized employee engagement. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's start with what this is going to look like. We're going to start a little bit with the end in mind here. What this is going to look like, and then we're going to unpack as we go along. But personalized employee engagement means at the high level is that you need to make employees the central players in your engagement programs, in your culture building programs, and not the central targets of your programs. There's no doubt that employees are the target of your employee engagement program, but all of the activity, everything is happening as I have mentioned through leaders and managers. Employees aren't getting that much, but employees are the ones that are the passive targets are passive, right? So employees are the ones that are there basically getting hit with things, hit with whatever the initiative is you've come up with or whatever the meeting is. Again, it's not too fun to be a target. It's much better to be the active player. So to make employees the active player, this means that we need to give them as much information as everyone else. You're giving managers team reports, you're giving leaders dashboards, you're giving insights, you have employees need to be having all of that as well, particularly, as we'll see, having that in relationship to their own experiences. So we need to give them as much information as everyone else. We need to include employees in the process, just as we do every other stakeholder. They're not the end recipients of something that trickles down. They need to be included from the get-go. And we need to empower them to take direct action themselves to improve their work lives, just in the same way that leadership and managers get feedback and insights and things from current programs that are then supposed to be synthesized into actions. Employees need to be doing the same things with their data and with what's going on in the organization. This is what personalized employee engagement is about. As we're going to see, it will be transformative, and it's going to finally crack open the engagement problem that has vexed almost every company, and certainly industry itself, for decades now. Let me start with why people don't often take this approach, or a lot of resistances that we can get to this approach, because again, there's this entrenched sense of command and control, top down, etc., that it can be hard to break through, right? So common reactions that maintain this problem. Right? First is, okay, so the employees are going to get reports and work on things, like, so managers themselves and leaders kind of don't like to lose control. Well, what are we supposed to do? What's our role if we're not the ones who have our hands solely on the wheel? We're going to address this as we go along. Then there's another position, which is intrinsically motivated. You haven't met my team. This is what I was mentioning earlier. This happens a lot in organizations. A lot of the work we do with organizations, there are teams that are very demotivated. They're underperforming. They're being manipulative. They really do seem like, man, if you are not on them every single minute, then nothing good is going to happen. And we're going to talk about that. And then the third one, which is kind of my favorite, is just this general fear about giving employees information. Like just giving it to them? Are you mad that somehow if we do that, right, that employees are going to, pick up the pitchforks and torches and storm the castle? Right? It's like, what's going to happen? A lot of this comes out of the fact that when you don't really have an understanding or framework of the issue of engagement, and you also take the approach that this is something that needs to be pulled forth from them, or it's a performance metric, those sorts of things create this sense of fear. If we flip this if we flip this equation, as we're going to do, and we look at the entire issue from the standpoint of the employee and the things that they are intrinsically wanting to do, this fear goes away. Then there's the second fear of, well, if you put this in their hands and you take it away, all my team is going to do is go to sleep and not do anything. We're going to address that directly. And we're also going to address this issue of, well, if I'm not in control or command, or the employees are taking a large part or active agents, then what is my role? What is it that I'm supposed to do? And this is not something that, we've been so entrenched in traditional management of command and control. This is going to require a change of thinking, but we're going to see there's all kinds of awesome stuff to do in order to collaborate with your employees and with everyone in the organization to build a greater culture. So let's get into it and let's unpack that. All right, let's come back. And again, I want to emphasize this point about engagement. Engagement cannot be created from the outside. It must grow from within. So engagement is actually one of the many things that I always call these aspirational states that are actually easy to understand. There's in the engagement literature, and I hear so many talks where it's like, how do we define engagement? What does it mean? And I'm not worried about that. I think everybody can define engagement very, very well, right? We know it when we see it. I love my job. I'm committed to my job. We know what engagement is. It's not measuring engagement that's the problem. It's knowing how can we find those experiences and the key things that are going to allow that to grow within each individual. And so that's what we're going to unpack today, because there's a science that tells us exactly what those things are and enable us to very practically implement personalized employee engagement. And it starts again with this idea that every employee is already motivated towards that growth. That growth meaning that they want to grow into deeper engagement, into deeper commitment. That's what they want. That engine is already there. And again, to prove that point, I'm just going to ask you, we're going to do a gut check. And I just want to ask all of you to just look in the mirror here, just put your face there. And I'm going to ask some questions that are going to seem pretty silly, but I think prove the point. Would you prefer to love your job or not love your job, or feel alienated from your job? Would you prefer to feel purpose in your work and meaning in your work, to feel fulfilled in what you're doing versus just, it's a job, I'm showing up, kind of doing it? Feel committed and connected. I could go on. But of course, the answer to all these questions is, of course you would. Of course, that sounds awesome. Now, there are a lot of people maybe that have given up on that or disillusioned, but I need to come back to this point, and I'm going to unpack the science in a minute, that this engine is there. It's whether it's revving or idling, it is on and it is ready to go. And this is an intrinsic energy that we simply have not tapped into. And so what we want to unpack is, what is the key to setting free this basic human drive for engagement and meaningful work and all these things that exist in each and every employee? And for this, we're going to turn to self-determination theory. Self-determination theory really is the science that empowers, is really behind this approach of personalized employee engagement. And it's the leading theory in the world right now for the study of, scientific study of motivation, engagement, well-being, all of these issues. One of the reasons that it being a science is important is, number one, all the things I'm going to talk about today have been incredibly well validated. And number two, because it's a science and it's quantifiable, that means we can measure it. We can use those measurements to very quantifiably drive personalized reports. All kinds of cool things come out of the scientific nature of the theory. But first and foremost, I want to lay out that it's had an amazing set of growth. This is just showing the citation growth over the last 20 years or so. And we're now at the point where last year, almost 50,000 times, so 100 to 150 times every single day, this theory is being cited in studies, used in studies, referenced in publications, referenced in applied work. And no other theory out there right now. And a lot of this growth has happened just over the last 10 or 15 years. But it's a very exciting set of resources. And I've put the address up here, selfdeterminationtheory.org, that you can go to download all kinds of research, all kinds of papers and resources. This is a link to our not-for-profit arm, the Center for Self-Determination Theory. And so you can check all of that out there. But let's get into unpacking this, which is how does this science help us build personalized employee engagement? And I'm going to distill down about 40 plus years, thousands of studies of science into about 10 minutes, or at least the core of it. And I'm going to focus on something called basic psychological needs, which is really at the heart of so much of well-being and self-determination and engagement. And it turns out that there are 3 core experiences that all of us must have at work in order for us to have a sense of vitality and well-being and engagement and inclusion and all of the good things we want in our cultures. And those 3 experiences, as we'll see, are tied to psychological needs that are universal and that we all share. So let's go over those. The first is we all want to have the experience at work and in our lives generally, I believe. And what I mean here is I believe in what I'm doing. The actions I'm taking, I feel like I'm the author of those actions. I endorse them. I believe in the mission of my company, but even at a zoomed in level, when I sit down at my desk every day or I walk onto the factory floor, I believe in the tasks that I'm undertaking, meaning I believe in their value. I might not enjoy them, but I definitely see the connection between what I'm doing and things that I value and things that I see are important and the mission of what I'm about. That experience of I believe is the first very critical experience. And when we look at what's underneath that experience of I believe, we have the basic need for autonomy. This is a basic psychological need. When I say basic, I mean it's as fundamental to humans as hunger or thirst. All the 3 needs I'm going to talk about have that quality. The research has demonstrated it. It's not that some people have it, some people don't, or millennials have it and older people don't. We all have it. And that's part of the power here, is that we can rely on this model to work everywhere for everyone very powerfully. Autonomy is that basic need to feel we're the authors of our lives, that we endorse the paths we're traveling and the tasks we are undertaking. And so much research has been done, we're able to pull key questions that measure autonomy as well as key interventions that individual employees can be doing in their own lives, and that managers, as we'll see, can be doing to help support them to fulfill their autonomy at work. And so what does autonomy look like to employees when you're thinking about the kinds of things to focus on in your training and in your measurement? Well, the employees want to know, how do I understand how my job is contributing to the overall mission? Sometimes you've seen in the literature the importance of purpose and things. All these things are tied very much as well into the basic need for autonomy. Am I given clear rationales for what I'm doing? There's a new assignment, there's a new task, there's a new policy, there's a new workflow. Is the reason I've been given to do that, we have a new policy? Management says it must be done this way? Or is time being taken to say, we have a new policy, let us explain to you why this new policy is being put into place. Let us explain the rationale and how it connects. Do I understand that? Are my objections and struggles heard and acknowledged? Now, a lot of times when we're working with organizations, again, we see a little bit of a fear that you want to make sure you try to explain away objections as best you can, not let the objections become this tidal wave that if you give them too much of a megaphone, that there's going to be a problem. Actually, the opposite is true. When you listen to objections and struggles, when people feel they're heard and acknowledged, that's the thing that makes them feel more fulfilled and more centered, even if there's nothing that, if those policies can't change, right? That's when you circle back into rationales, et cetera. Job crafting. Do I have meaningful choice in how I execute my job? That's another thing that people will look at. And I could go on here, but these are sort of core These are sort of core questions or themes that you want to be focused on, and that employees themselves can be in a personalized employee engagement approach. These are ways that you can train them to focus on these things and give them and empower them to take actions to feel more fulfilled in these different areas. One thing I'll just point out before we move on is that notice that autonomy is not fundamentally about, do I have freedom to do what I want to do? Do I have independence? I think most of us, or a lot of us, will have kind of use freedom and independence as a synonym for autonomy. But it's really not about freedom or independence. It's about this sense of endorsement. Why is that nuance important? Well, because we don't have a lot of freedom, particularly in our adult lives, but in corporate lives, we have jobs we have to do. We have things we have to get done. We have policies we have to follow. If we think about autonomy as freedom, then autonomy itself becomes in direct conflict with so much of the reality of work life. By understanding it in its more accurate way of this sense of endorsement, it opens up all kinds of opportunities to be satisfying that need for autonomy, even in circumstances of great structure. Anyway, let's move on to the second core experience that everyone must have. This, of course, is very much related to inclusion. It's a sense of I belong. I want to feel like I matter to those I'm working with. I want to feel like they matter to me. I want to feel like I'm respected. But I really want to have this sense that my voice is not just heard, but it's also valued. And the reason that this basic psychological, the reason that this experience is so important is because it's a direct outcropping from our basic psychological need for relatedness. Again, this is another one of those basic needs that's universal. And relatedness is our basic need to feel that we truly matter to those around us, that we're respected, supported, cared for, and that we have the opportunity to reciprocate that caring. And so when we understand that basic need, we can now build our programs, our feedback, our action items for employees in a personalized employee engagement approach around this engine, right, of feeling that people belong, feeling that I belong. Is my perspective valued? Do I matter to my coworkers and to the company? How am I included in planning and problem solving? Are my objections and ideas heard? Do I actually experience that I feel like I have something to contribute to what's happening? And so I could go on here again. I'm just giving some examples, but there's a rich literature coming out of self-determination theory of the various kinds of experiences and also experience crafting that can be done by employees and by managers and by the culture in order to provide support for this basic need and help to pull forth greater inclusion in this sense of I belong, or not pull forth, but actually to let that emerge and flourish. And the third key experience is I succeed. I want to feel like I'm efficacious in my job, and not just that, I want to feel that I'm crushing it a lot of the time. I'm masterful. We use the term mastery a lot, and we're going to see that in just a minute. That's another basic psychological need. But this idea of success, and it's not just moment to moment, but also a sense that I'm growing. I'm growing not just in getting promotions, but I'm growing in my core skills. And as I just said, I succeed is coming out of our basic psychological need for mastery. This is the third of our basic needs. And the mastery need, just to define it one more time, is that basic need to feel successful and efficacious and to experience growth and development. And this is a very, very core need that people have, that all employees have. And so what does it look like to employees? Well, do I consider myself both effective and skillful? What's the difference? Well, effective is I can kind of get my job done. But for mastery to really be fulfilled, we want to feel skillful at that job. We don't want to feel just that we can, get past, a minimum threshold. Am I confident in my ability to succeed in the actual task, in the skill development, not just with respect to I'm succeeding by, going up the corporate ladder, getting promotions, etc. It's very important to understand those differences, because many times career path planning is not overlooks the much more important, or equally important at least, skill development that people want to feel as they progress through their career path? How frequently am I experiencing kind of clear wins, and am I getting feedback on those things? Are there pathways for growth, both skill and opportunity, that are available to me? Again, both in terms of skills and also in terms of advancement. And does the company allow me to fail and learn? Or another way to frame that is what is the culture of failure in the organization? Is there an opportunity to learn from failure, or is failure one of those things that is so frowned upon that there's really not a pathway for that to be anything other than a negative experience? And so again, these are just some brief examples for in the time we have today, but there's a deep library of ways in which to assess and also to intervene and to give very concrete actions that employees can grab hold of in order to begin to craft the experiences that will help their engagement to grow. These core experiences of I succeed, I believe, and I belong. And I want to point out again that these experiences, you've probably heard things similar, and you probably have talked about similar things. You maybe even have used these same terms. But the challenge, again, is always that we're very good at understanding outcomes and understanding aspirations. What we need is a framework that we can trust and take action on that is upstream of those outcomes, and that helps to bring about those outcomes, helps to let those outcomes emerge, because we can't manipulate them directly. We shouldn't even be trying. And that's what's great about self-determination theory, because we know now what are the upstream experiences, where do they come from, where are they rooted in? And they're rooted in these needs for autonomy, for relatedness, and for mastery. And we can be excited about this and trust this because of just the incredible foundation of this approach and this model as a proven science, how well it's been validated, and also that it's highly actionable, interventions are highly effective, and that it's measurable, right? So, because if we're going to personalize employee engagement, what's the one thing, if people are thinking tactically, you're already ahead of me on this. So it's like, okay, how do I personalize? I have 100, 5,000, 10,000 employees in my organization. How the heck do I personalize this kind of feedback to them? And the answer is, since we can measure these things quantifiably, then we're able to give feedback to people. We can algorithmically score and generate reports and other things. I'll give an example in a minute, but you can now give people their individual scores. You can give them the report. That report you're giving to the managers or to the leaders, every employee can get one. So it enables, the science is what enables meaningful personalization of employee engagement, because it very discreetly gives the framework of what to measure, how those things interrelate, how they connect to key experiences, and it gives them in a way that's quantifiable so that we can actually give these different score profiles to each employee. Now, here's, of course, a very key point in all this. In this personalized employee engagement approach, this is a science all employees implicitly love. And the reason I know that is because they're human beings. Because it's about their fundamental well-being and fulfillment. This is not a model that grew out of corporate management. This is a model that grew out of the psychology of well-being, fulfillment, and motivation. This is something, as I'm sure as I go over these three different experiences of I believe, I belong, I succeed, there's no objection that these things are going to resonate, and that if people can learn something and be empowered to build those experiences, guess what? They're going to want their data, because it's meaningful self-knowledge that they can use to grow. And so we think about 4 ways or 4 steps here, just to try to synthesize this as we turn the corner. Looking at the clock, I think we're okay on time. Let me go over kind of 4 steps here for how this even gets rolled out at a high level. Well, the first step is, and this is the exciting part, there's the opportunity here to take a whole new approach to employee engagement with the employees themselves. Now, I will tell you that the majority of the time that we talk to employees about the annual employee survey or about employee engagement things, we do not get, let's say we do not get a lot of enthusiasm. Okay. Now, we don't get a lot of enthusiasm for all the reasons I've talked about already. Mostly it's that they do all the work and they get the least amount of feedback. They just get targeted at the end of a command and control process. We've been over all that. Now there's a reframe, and it's a very authentic reframe. It's not just a marketing pitch. It's true that we have a new approach. The personalized employee engagement approach is about giving you a central role in building a more fulfilling work life for yourself by focusing on what's important to you and what's valuable to you. Second, give them the data. They answer a lot of questions. Give them the data. People love to learn about themselves, and they can learn about things that are truly matter to them. Let them see reporting on their key experiences so that they can begin to have personal insights and engage and think about how they're going to grow and how they're going to be more fulfilled. Then draw from the evidence that's out there in self-determination theory to provide insights that are personalized to their experiences. And what I mean by this is there have been a lot of interventions, a lot of studies looking at what are the different things that you can do in order to improve the satisfaction of your basic psychological needs and to grow into more fulfilling experiences like I belong and I believe and I succeed. Again, you can draw those out and put those directly in front of employees based on their score profile. Someone's low on their sense of mastery fulfillment, pull out of the evidence base those things that people can do for themselves, put it in front of employees, and you've just given them an incredible tool for self-growth, right? So then that's the fourth step, is provide a menu of how-to recipes customized specifically to those needs to help them build an action plan. Now, I'm just going to give an example of how we do this. I've already shown you the resource for the not-for-profit self-determination theory where a lot of this research sits, but just an example. So our experience reports are provided to every employee. Actually, they can get them instantly after filling out, about 5 minutes worth of questions that are focusing on these core experiences. It's another great thing about focusing on having a strong framework that focuses on just 3 core things, is that you can very quickly assess what matters to employees, and then you can generate and give them a whole bunch of resources immediately. They get a dashboard that helps them focus in on the things that matter, again, based on the evidence from all of the great research in self-determination theory, so that they can have more fulfillment and well-being. Give them an individual report where they get insights and they're getting recommendations tied directly to their experiences that they can then, again, we're very much about autonomy support, right? We want to give people meaningful choice. We want people to feel like they're the authors of their plans. So we give them choice here, but the choices are ones that are relevant to them based on the experiences that we've listened to and that they've reported. And then they're able to build that personal action plan, right, of the things that they're going to do. And they're able to get step-by-step recipes on how to do it, which is one of the things that's so challenging when you get to the end of any employee engagement effort. It's like, okay, well, what am I really supposed to focus on? What am I really supposed to do? You can go to selfdeterminationtheory.org, and there's all sorts of research there. And this is just one example of how we've taken it and kind of instantiated it into a program. And so this personalized employee engagement approach solves for all these objections too. I just want to circle back to these folks, because if I've given people information that is framed, hey, we want you to be an active partner with us in your well-being and in your fulfillment at work, it's important to us that you feel fulfilled in your work. And yeah, the organization gets lots of great things out of that, but we care about you. And so we want to give you resources for this self-learning and make sure that instead of us trying to do employee engagement to you, we want you to be an active part in it. And so here we go, and we're going to focus on your needs. This is something that is not going to create, nobody's going to pull out the pitchforks and torches. This is something that employees celebrate. And so it's not going to be a problem. This fellow doesn't need to worry. Now, now we have the issue we talked about before, which is, yeah, but you haven't met my team. They're not motivated at all. And I want to talk about this for just a couple of minutes. There is a phenomena that happens whenever you have a culture, and it can be just a single team, it can be a whole culture, but you can call it a culture of control. And that's when managers are controlling. And what happens when managers are controlling, or when cultures are controlling, it's not even necessarily an individual manager problem. But when managers are controlling, you now, if you remember, if you were taking notes earlier in the presentation, what does that do? Well, it creates an undermining effect, and specifically to that basic psychological need for autonomy. Because if I'm being controlled, and that control can be, I'm going to dangle a reward in front of you, or I can threaten a punishment in front of you. This is why rewards often backfire, because if I feel manipulated or controlled, then I am not the author of what I'm doing. I don't feel like people are respecting that I want to believe in what I'm doing. Control is the opposite of trying to pull forth a true belief in what one is doing. It undermines this key need. It undermines this key thing. And what happens then? Guess what? You're demotivated. Now you start to not be motivated for your work, to check out early, to do all these things. Now, when you do that, what does your manager do? Man, Scott is a super lazy dude. I need to exert more control. So more control, more autonomy undermining, and you get into a toxic cycle. And you end up in this place where everybody feels like that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, that their position is supported. I have to control you or you won't do anything, right? This is why teams get into this place. There was a study that was done specifically with a big commercial laundry firm where they tried, again, to manipulate people's motivation to show up and work on time by putting rewards and controlling things in place. And I don't have time to talk about it in too much detail. But what was tragic about it is that not only did it undermine people's motivation for their work, but even the people that weren't showing late started to show up late and undermine their motivation for their work. And when you then tried to revert, the damage had already been done. And we see so many different examples of this. And people are interested, again, I've given you some resources. You can email me, but I can give you some more details on the undermining effect. The good news is that once you understand this, you can take a different approach, which is you're now going to enlist employees in something they do care about. You're going to unlock or free up their autonomy. And guess what? You're going to break this cycle. You're going to break this cycle very powerfully. And this is, again, how great is it to have, have the science and a model and the knowledge for why this happens. This is going to help even your most entrenched and dysfunctional teams to kind of break the cycle. And finally, this fellow is saying, so what do I do? Well, hopefully you've seen all kinds of things to do. Now that you have a framework for how to support each other, I understand the basic psychological needs that really let things thrive and come forth. Well, now actively supporting these core needs is going to give everyone plenty to do, and give people plenty to do in a way that the culture can really coalesce around as cultural norms. Because when you're supporting these key experiences of I succeed, I belong, I believe, and you understand the language of these basic needs, there's not many, right? There's 3 things, and they apply everywhere. You don't have to change your model year to year. This is basic psychological science. It's no matter what happens, what new technology, no matter what change initiatives are in place, this doesn't change. You can apply it. If you have offices around the world, these apply everywhere around the world. If you have young people, old people, this is a core model that can really be established to benefit all of your cultural norms. And you can develop training for personalized employee engagement and support of managers. This really extends to managers. So, just some examples. You can learn evidence-based skills like how to ensure tasks and goals are framed, connected to rationales and purpose. There's a whole skill set that managers can do there. How to sharpen listening skills. We always want our managers to listen better, but what does that mean? Well, if you understand how to listen for these themes of fulfillment of basic needs and these key experiences, and also understand how to support those needs, you have a specific set of skills, right? So we can actually train in the things that matter. How to recognize the importance of all team members, how to hold people accountable in a way that doesn't undermine their needs. Boy, there's all kinds of great things to do. And I'll just say that managers love it. One of the reasons they love it is that managers right now, most of them break pretty early on the engagement process. I've seen some research that says that more than half of them don't even read the engagement reports they get, or the efforts are kind of, you know, are not strong to put things into effect because they just don't see the benefit. They're worn out. They don't know what to do. The great thing about this approach is by including everyone and mostly by including the employees through the personalized employee engagement approach, the managers, it actually becomes easier for them. The burden is shared, but also one of the things the research shows is that when those employees start to behave in ways to work on their own need support, it actually helps the manager be more successful and less controlling of the employee and teams. And so instead of having a toxic cycle, you have a virtuous cycle. It's really quite amazing. As a matter of fact, here's just one nerdy study. Don't worry about understanding the numbers and everything. Basically what this shows, this is a meta-analysis of 72 different workplace studies over 30,000 employees across numerous countries. And it shows that when you focus on need support, you get more of that need fulfillment of autonomy, competence, which is mastery, and relatedness. That leads to higher quality motivation, more fulfillment, and you get greater vitality, well-being, decreases in distress, better work engagement, positive work behavior. I could go on, but it's a tide that raises all boats. So it's very powerful. And so we absolutely have a new set of things to focus on that isn't about command and control. There's plenty to do, and it's about facilitating need support, well-being, and success. And so just to wrap up here, so we have a couple of minutes for questions, I just want to come back and say this personalized employee engagement approach really, this can transform your culture because we can finally realize this aspiration of people first, which is in almost everyone's mission statement. And almost everyone talks about this, and you won't find a leader on earth that won't endorse that their people need to come first. But the challenge is always, how do you do it? Well, you now have the model to do it. And well, I've mentioned resources to help dive in deeper. I'll mention them again as we close things out. But the current systems, this inverted pyramid, are just, they need to be replaced by a personalized approach that builds this foundation of inclusion and data and insights and support and empowerment of the individual employees. And then on top of that, gives managers the training and support they need as well to help support those basic needs and be more effective as managers. Leaders to help understand what's happening across their culture on these kind of core experiences and the basic sense of fulfillment of needs. And this becomes a much more solid structure. And again, it's all based on this self-determination theory model. Again, here's the URL for that at our not-for-profit site, Center for Self-Determination Theory. And I'll just close by saying that, you know, we focused on engagement, but you've also heard me slip into other areas, and I'll just put them up here in that, you know, as the tide that raises all boats. This improves compliance, it improves ethical behavior, improves customer satisfaction, it improves performance, it improves vitality and wellness, which I've mentioned, diversity and inclusion. And if you think about it, it makes sense, because if we're talking about a genuine, authentic support for every human being in our organization's basic psychological needs, how could it not be true that all of our cultural metrics are going to improve, that it's going to be universal in that way? And so in addition to the self-determinationtheory.org, if you want to talk to us more about how we're actually putting this to work or see examples of how we're doing it in real time, visit us at motivationworks.com to look at our personalized employee engagement platform. Shoot me an email with questions. I think we're going to finish up here with enough time for a few questions. And I think I'll end there and throw it back over to you, Mark. And I appreciate everyone's attention today.
Scott, we do have our first question is from Karen, who writes, pay isn't equivalent to engagement. How do we keep employees focused on the motivation, culture, engagement when in this current market, they ask for more money, claiming that's what will motivate them? The company keep up with the pay wars that are occurring today.
Yeah, so this is a great question. So, I mean, there's a lot. I could go on for a long time on compensation systems and on pay. I mean, the first thing to recognize is that, you know, pay is kind of the price of admission for, you know, that's why we all have jobs, right? Because we all have mortgages and like to eat food and things like that. So So that's kind of pay is a foundational thing. But when you look at the issue of pay, and even when employees say, "Oh, pay is the most important thing to me," there's a lot that can be learned in that. When we see that happening in organizations themselves, it's like, pay me more or I'm heading for the door. It's usually a symptom that they're in a culture where a lot of those basic needs are not being fulfilled. What we see is that in cultures where the factors I'm talking about are fulfilled, that people have a much greater satisfaction with their compensation, even when they're making less or making the lower end of the pay ranges out in the industry. That people tend to be more pay focused when they can't see anything else that they're getting out of their job. And of course, what we know is that even if you do pay them more, that's not going to last very long. The fundamental issue is not going to be addressed. And so what we find, and we measure this in our Motivation Wars platform, is we do measure a couple elements of compensation. We measure overall satisfaction, which is, do they feel like they're getting enough pay in order to meet their needs? And we measure compensation fairness or equity, which is, do they feel that pay policies, not that everyone's paid equally, but that pay policies are administered fairly across the organization. And those things, again, we see covariances with needs in the ways I've talked about, but it's important that people have, or at least meeting a threshold on both those things. Beyond that threshold, we see a much more important factor from the things that I'm talking about today. And so, and the last thing I'll say, Karen, is that pay ultimately is something that's a signal to people about their worth. And again, people over-index a lot on pay at times when they don't see any other indicators to them that there's any worth or value in what their job is. Focusing on these things helps to put that much more into a balanced equation.
Terrific. Thanks, Scott. Next question. If we help our employees experience more autonomy, mastery, and relatedness, wouldn't this also make it easier for managers to manage them?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And so I mentioned this a little bit at the end, which is, there's actually some research on this, that when you essentially engage everyone in this process, and here I'm thinking mainly of the employees, now it's not the manager's work to somehow pull their team's engagement numbers up in some way, right? This is how most engagement programs work now. Managers get a report, they might get some coaching, some training. Usually they don't feel competent to do it, but it's their job. And sometimes it's a performance goal, right? You need to get this stat up X amount on your team. And so then a whole bunch of things start to happen. In the personalized employee engagement approach, everyone's working on this together. So first of all, there's the idea that the load is being shared, but it's much more essential than that, because it's not a job to want to feel more engaged at work. If for the individual employee, as we've talked about, they intrinsically want that. That's what they want. If you bring them into this process authentically, you give them the information to help them grow, you give them actionable things that they can be doing, including, by the way, ways to communicate more effectively with their coworkers or with their managers, ways that they can participate in accountability and performance reviews and team meetings. All these things can happen in a way that they lean into that process, and they do it. This is what I meant by, there's already all these engines, millions of engines out there that we're simply not tapping into, that people want to grow. When they do that, it follows that the manager's job is going to become a lot easier, because now he or she has a partner, right, in what's happening. Lots of partners, which is all the employees on the team.
Good stuff, Scott. Thanks. One last question real quick. What kind of specific results have you seen for organizations in terms of outcomes like retention and employee net promoter score from personalized employee engagement?
Oh yeah, we've seen, not surprisingly, retention numbers improve very quickly in this approach, because, I mean, listen, all you need to do is look at what, there's lots of reports out there now of what employees are saying, which is, I need to find something that's good for me, not just, and this kind of relates back to the pay issue. It's not just the pay, right? I want to be engaged in something that I care about. I want to be engaged. I want to be doing something that's meaningful to me, that I value. And so when when we've implemented these systems, we've seen, even just over the course of a 6-month period, we've seen retention numbers improve by anywhere from 40 to 75% over what they had been in the trailing year. And then those numbers just tend to, improve as things go along. And so, and we see meaningful improvement in that same time frame on almost every, as I was mentioning, almost every cultural measure, because these are just such fundamental issues.